Welcome back to Tales from the Darkroom. Tonight we bring you a chilling story about trust, secrets, and the horrors that linger in forgotten places. This is The Window in Vermont. Emily had always been drawn to adventure, to the thrill of the unknown. Her life, a predictable rhythm of work, home, and repeat, felt like a cage she was desperate to escape. So when she met Michael online, he seemed like the perfect key to unlock it. He spoke of a life she craved, one lived in a small, quiet town in Vermont, surrounded by ancient woods and sprawling farmland. His words painted a picture of rustic charm and peaceful solitude. After weeks of late-night chats and shared dreams, the digital connection felt undeniably real. She had to see it for herself. She booked a ticket, packed a bag, and set off to meet the man who promised a world away from her own. The drive there was beautiful, a winding journey through autumn-colored hills that slowly gave way to isolated country roads. But as she pulled into the long gravel driveway, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. The farmhouse was older than she'd imagined. It stood hunched against the graying sky, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows like vacant eyes. With every step she took on the porch, the wood groaned, a low, mournful sound that echoed in the heavy silence. The door creaked open before she could knock. Michael's grandmother stood there, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her smile was warm, instantly putting Emily at ease. "You must be Emily. We're so glad you made it. Come in. Come in. I've just baked an apple pie." The sweet cinnamon scent filled the air, a comforting aroma that battled the house's musty odor. Michael appeared behind his grandmother, his familiar smile just as charming in person. He hugged her, a little too tightly perhaps, but she wrote it off as excitement. As her eyes adjusted to the dim interior, however, she noticed his grandfather. He was sitting in a high-backed armchair in the darkest corner of the living room, a statue carved from shadows. He didn't smile or greet her. He just watched. His eyes, pale and unnervingly still, seemed to bore right through her. They never seemed to blink long enough for her to feel unobserved. An involuntary shiver traced its way down her spine. She tried to shake it off, blaming the long drive. It was just an old house with old people, nothing to be afraid of. That evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and forced smiles. Michael was attentive, but there was a nervous energy about him she hadn't noticed online. His grandmother chattered on about the town's history, but her stories often trailed off into unsettling silence. The grandfather remained in his corner, a silent, unnerving sentinel. Finally, Michael announced it was getting late and showed her to the guest room upstairs. The air on the second floor was thick and heavy, laden with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly floral, like dried, decaying flowers. The room was sparse, dominated by a large four-poster bed and walls covered in old, faded portraits. The painted eyes of forgotten ancestors followed her as she walked in. Michael lingered at the doorway. He looked from her to the large wooden-framed window, and his easygoing demeanor vanished. A shadow of genuine fear crossed his face. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a serious, urgent whisper. "Emily, just one thing. It's an old house, it has its quirks. But whatever you do tonight, whatever you hear, don't open the window." His tone was so final, so steeped in fear, that it sent a fresh chill through her. Emily managed a weak, forced laugh. "Okay, is it haunted or something?" she joked, trying to lighten the suffocating mood. Michael didn't laugh back. He just stared at her, his expression grim. "I'm serious, Emily. Just please don't open it. Don't..." And with that, he closed the door, leaving her alone in the oppressive silence, the weight of his warning hanging in the air. She tried to brush it off. An old wives' tale, a local superstition, maybe a prank to scare the city girl. She changed into her pajamas, climbed into the cold, stiff bed, and pulled the covers up to her chin. But sleep wouldn't come. The house settled around her, a symphony of creaks and groans. And then, the wind began to howl. It wasn't a normal wind. It sounded like a mournful cry, a lonely voice calling out from the darkness, seeming to scratch and claw at the glass of that one forbidden window. She tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around her legs. Every nerve in her body was on high alert. Her eyes, against her will, kept drifting to the window. It was a simple, old wooden window with a small tarnished brass latch. What could be so terrible about opening it? The more she tried to ignore it, the more the curiosity grew, gnawing at her. A maddening itch she couldn't scratch. The wind howled louder, this time sounding almost like a name, her name, whispered on the gale. That was it. She couldn't take it anymore. Logic and reason were drowned out by an overwhelming, irrational compulsion. Throwing back the covers, she tiptoed across the cold wooden floor. Her hand trembled as she reached for the latch. Michael's warning echoed in her head. Dante opened the window, but it was a distant sound, easily ignored. With a faint click, she unlatched it. She pushed the window open, just a crack at first. A blast of freezing, damp air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and decay. It instantly chilled her to the bone. Her breath hitched. She peered out into the inky blackness, where the moonlight cast a pale, ghostly glow over the dormant fields. And that's when she saw it. Or rather, she saw her. Standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the fields, was a figure, a woman. She was unnaturally still, a statue in the moonlight. Her face was as pale as bone, her eyes two hollow black pits that seemed to absorb the light around them. A long tattered white dress clung to her gaunt frame, fluttering gently in the wind. But it was her mouth that made Emily's blood run cold. Her lips were stretched, unnaturally wide, into a grotesque, predatory smile. A smile that wasn't happy or welcoming. It was a smile of pure, malevolent hunger. A strangled gasp escaped Emily's throat. She stumbled backward, slamming the window shut with all her might. The old glass rattled violently in its frame, the sound deafening in the silence of the room. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She scrambled back to the bed, peering over the edge of the covers. The figure outside didn't move. It didn't react. It just stood there, staring at the house, at her window, with that same horrifying, fixed smile. Emily didn't sleep. She sat huddled in the bed, shaking, her eyes glued to the window, waiting for the figure to move, to disappear, to do anything. But it remained, a silent, terrifying sentinel in the moonlight. Exhaustion eventually won the battle, pulling her into a shallow, restless sleep, filled with nightmares of hollow eyes and a blood-curdling smile. Dawn's grey light was a welcome relief. It crept through the window, chasing away the deepest shadows. The figure was gone. With a shaky sense of resolve, Emily got dressed, her mind racing. She had to get out of there. It wasn't a prank. It was real. She walked down to the kitchen, her steps hesitant. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, a horribly normal scent in this house of horrors. Michael was at the table, staring into his mug, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet her eyes. His grandmother was at the stove, but her usual cheerful demeanor was gone. Her hands trembled so much that coffee sloshed over the rim of the pot as she poured. Emily sat down, the silence at the table thick and suffocating. The grandfather was in his usual corner, his gaze more intense than ever. Finally, the old woman set the coffee pot down with a clatter. She turned, her face etched with a deep, knowing sorrow. She leaned closer to Emily, her voice barely a whisper, a conspiratorial, fearful hiss. "Sweetheart, tell me the truth. We need to know." Her eyes, full of a terrifying pity, locked onto Emily's. "Did you open that window last night?" Emily froze. Her coffee cup shook in her hand, rattling against the saucer. The world seemed to slow down. A single drop of coffee spilled, a dark stain spreading on the white porcelain. How could she possibly know? What had she seen? And more importantly, what was going to happen now that she had? The grandmother's fearful eyes held the answer, an answer Emily was suddenly terrified to learn. You never truly know what secrets linger inside old houses, or what waits patiently for an invitation just beyond a closed window. If you ever find yourself in a strange old room and you hear that warning, don't open it, remember Emily's story. Remember the smile in the moonlight. This was The Window in Vermont. You've been watching Tales from the Darkroom. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Sleep well, if you can.